So, welcome back to Wemcast. My name's Will Duffin, and I have the pleasure of welcoming, all the way from Australia via Zoom, Glenn Singleman. How are you doing, Glenn?
Fantastic, Will. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. You're joining us from the New South Wales Victorian border in Albury, I gather.
Correct. Yeah, on the on the edge of the mountains here. It's a really beautiful part of Australia, and we love
Lovely.
UK doctors coming down to visit and do a little work.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I've been out there, worked in Gosford for a time in the emergency department there. Great place to go. Plenty of pommies out there staffing the EDs.
Yeah, plenty, and lovely to work with them too.
Yeah, great. And you've had quite a remarkable career, Glenn. So you've had, well, 4 separate careers, really. You're a medical doctor, an emergency department physician. You're a documentary filmmaker, an expedition doctor, and also a accomplished wingsuit pilot.
Yeah, it's one of those, the kind of the new age person, the combination of skills. Everyone's supposed to change jobs 7 times in their career. Well, fortunately, medicine is a really good career to fall back on because it gives you, I mean, it's a great career. It's a wonderful thing to be dealing with people, but it also gives you a discipline of mental focus so that if you want to entertain, other creative aspects about your psyche or whatever, you can do that in a kind of scientific evidence-based way, and that's what I've tried to do with all of my other careers. It has been an expression of my creativity and my passion for living a fulfilled and involved life. But I've always tried to do it with a degree of scientific objectivity so that when I've taken risks in the extreme sport arena anyway, I've always regarded them as acceptable or manageable risks based on my training in medicine. And that's one of the great things about medicine. It gives you that evidence-based, objective outlook on pretty much anything you want to do in life.
So I gather it was in terms of all your risk taking, it was the mountaineering that came first. Is that right?
No, it was actually canyoning came first.
Canyoning, right.
There's these wonderful canyons in Australia that are like more than 100 million years old. They were an old seabed that was uplifted, and the sandstone over time has been cut through by the creeks and rivers like a knife cutting through butter. And you get these formations that are, 10, 20 metres wide, but, potentially hundreds of metres deep. And you go down these formations, swimming through the pools, abseiling off the waterfalls. And the first time I went down one of these things and I had to abseil down a waterfall, I really thought I'm going to die. This is it. Yeah. I've bitten off too much here. But I didn't die. And in fact, I discovered one of those intense, involved states that we come to call, it's come to be known as flow, but it was one of those times when I experienced it and it was a transcendent experience. And I thought, I want to keep going with this. And I realised that the barriers to me doing this kind of stuff were fear. I'd always been too afraid to go canyoning and I'd always been too afraid to go climbing or skydiving or whatever. And then so I deliberately sort of said, okay, let's look at what fear is. Let's look at its impact on my life. And most importantly, how I can use scientific risk management techniques to go beyond the kind of cognitive bias of fear to get back to that enjoyment of the flow state in a sustainable, by sustainable I mean not kill myself, way. And so after canyoning, I went into rock climbing, and then from rock climbing it's logical to go into mountaineering. And then when I started to do a lot of rope work, filming with using rope work, and I was asked by a base jumper if I would film him jumping out of a balloon at 36,000 feet, which I did hanging off a rope on the outside of the balloon, as you do at 36,000 feet, obviously with oxygen and whatnot. And we got on very well during that project. And at the end of it, I said to him, I mean, in those days, this is back in the early 1990s, most people had never heard of base jumping. And I said to him, where do you want to go with this base jumping stuff? And he said, I want to jump off the highest cliff in the world. And I said, well, do you know where that is? He said, no. And I said, do you know how you'll get to the top of it? He said, no. And I had been reading a climbing magazine, a UK climbing magazine, the week before, which had a picture of the Great Trango Tower. And at the time, they thought that was the highest vertical cliff in the world. It was talking about the Norwegians who put up the Norwegian route. And I said to this base jumper, I said, look, I know where the highest cliff in the world is, and I know how to get to the top. The way we can do this, so I'll make you a deal. I'll teach you how to climb and mountaineer if you teach me how to skydive and base jump, and together we'll go and climb and base jump this highest cliff in the world. And that began a year-long project to train each other in the necessary skills to go and climb the Great Trango Tower and then base jump off the top. And that was like a mind-blowing project at the time. Literally, everybody said, you guys are crazy, you guys are going to die. I mean, absolutely everybody said that. And trying to get funding and sponsorship for, something like that back in those days, when literally we got laughed out of more boardrooms and offices than I can remember. But we eventually got the project up with a lot of sort of personal, we put a lot of things on the line, and it turned into this incredible success. But the movie that I made out of that, a movie called Base Climb, it was one of the most successful adventure documentaries ever made, because it tapped into one of people's most inherent fears, which is the fear of falling. And it not just tapped into that fear, but it mainlined into it and turned it upside down on its head and then shook everybody around. And then they came out the other side after we were successful. And we were very proud of what we did. Most importantly, we were very proud of the way that we did it, because we always believed that we were not just taking risk, but we were managing risk. So I used a lot of the training that I had in medicine in identifying real risk, like real objective risk, as opposed to subjective. I mean, many of the risks that people get caught up on in their own lives are subjective risks, where they, due to some cognitive bias or other, think that something that they want to do is extraordinarily dangerous. Like everybody said, everybody I know thinks that when you go base jumping, you jump off the cliff and go splat. Well, it doesn't happen like that. There is physics involved, physics of acceleration, physics of distance, time, S equals, AT squared on 2, all of that stuff applies to any adventure or extreme sport undertaking. And if you've got enough of a scientific background to understand physics, then, like I actually, during that year of training, I went and did a parachute system technology course at MIT so that I had a pretty good idea that parachutes usually open when you follow but I wanted to know not just that somebody else will tell me that, I wanted to know how a parachute opens, what are the physics that determine the opening and dynamics of decelerator systems. And so I went and did a short course in that. And that was the kind of application, the kind of approach that we adopted to making that film. Now, of course, we didn't have time within the context of that film to put all of that background in. So you just see us make these progressions in the film that a lot of people just thought were outrageous. Like in one scene, the guy that I was training with, he's learning to rock climb, and in the next he's, climbing a 6,000 metre mountain in the Himalayas. And for the tyranny of documentary filmmaking is that you compress a year into an hour. And so we were fairly roundly criticised when we made that film. I mean, the film came with multiple health warnings. We won I won an award in the Trento Mountain Film Festival, and the judges felt it necessary to issue a press release with a warning about, don't do this at home. As if people are going to base jump, off their dining room table and die or something like that. It was just, but that was the time. And it's been interesting for me to look back over the last 20 years and see how extreme sport has evolved and exploded. Yeah. And just changed the way, not only the way that we view sport, but the way that we view risk, the way that we view human performance, the way we view what's possible.
So, the adventure sports industry really exploded I was just being born in the 80s, and you were part of this explosion in adventure sports, of which base jumping was a part. And a huge critique that was leveled at it at the time, and still is that this is just irresponsible risk taking. How do you respond to that?
So you could level that criticism at all extreme sport, because one of the, I guess, fundamental background attributes of extreme is that there's the potential for injury and death. Otherwise, it would be, non-extreme, it would be cricket. Mind you, I mean, not that cricket's not without risk, but the thing about the extreme part of extreme sport is that because it involves risk, it's a pathway, like a direct pathway to activating that peak performance state that, Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. But this flow state, it's well described throughout history. People who undertake any risky activity or find themselves in a life-threatening situation suddenly find that they can tap into this level of enhanced performance, and that time seems to slow down, and that we become totally involved in what we're doing, and we perform way beyond what we thought were our limits. And that was described by Byron, it was described by Livingstone and Stanley. I think Livingstone was attacked by a lion. It's been described countless times, but it's only in recent times through the work of Csikszentmihalyi that we've actually been able to codify what this flow state really is and understand its connection to peak human performance. And we, back in 1991, when we jumped off the Great Trango Tower, we went any sort of base jumping, really, any extreme skydiving, it's all mountaineering, rock climbing for me, it's like an instant access into this flow state where you are so concentrated on what you're doing that all of the trivia and paraphernalia of day-to-day life just falls away. Who cares about the mortgage repayments and and whatever else is going on, and what politicians are yabbering on? None of that stuff matters, because you are totally involved in the moment and understanding the capability, the capacity, the possibility of human existence, as opposed to just the humdrum, the ho-hum kind of day-to-day pursuit of longevity. And so, yes, there is a risk. I accept that all extreme sport comes with a risk, but it comes with this incredible reward, this reward of accessing the flow state. And that reward, once you've tasted it, once you've, bitten into that, mouthful of life, then it's an addictive state, I guess. You want to go back for more. But in my case, I wanted to go back for more while not killing myself. I understood, the medical part of me understood really well the degree of the risk that I was taking. And so I always thought that I managed risk in a responsible way. Responsible for me. I mean, this is an individual choice and it's an individual decision that we all make. And the fact that I'm still alive after 20 years of doing this stuff, I guess, is a testament to the scientific approach that I've tried to take in undertaking all of these different projects. And the most, I guess, spectacular example of that was that particular project, jumping off that cliff. And because it really put us out there in the public realm in terms of, it was very, I can't tell you the number of emails and letters and faxes. You remember the days of faxes that I got from people just saying what an irresponsible idiot I was, and as a doctor I should know better, and blah, 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 blah. It just went on and on and on and on for years, because that documentary, I think it's been seen, something like 700 million people saw that doco. So, for years I'd be getting letters or emails from, out of Botswana from somebody who just saw it for the first time,
Amazing. It's fascinating that I think a lot of people write off extreme sports athletes as being adrenaline junkies. And it's all about the rush of it, dopaminergic rush of adrenaline. But there's something much, much deeper there. This concept of flow that you reference.
Yeah, I mean, flow. It was well described by Maslow, who talks about peak. He talks about finding our purpose in life as being the ultimate meaning of our lives, finding purpose, finding meaning, finding understanding of who we are, what we're capable of. And extreme sport is a kind of way to, and Maslow talked a lot about these peak performance moments that people keep referencing. And so extreme sport is a way that dials everybody in immediately into that peak performance, that flow state, because
so for you, it's a gateway to flow.
It is an absolute gateway to flow. And that, it's really worth reading all the stuff that both Csikszentmihalyi and Stephen Kotler in his book, The Rise of Superman, what they have to say about how human performance, our understanding of human performance, is being changed, radically altered by extreme sportsmen and women, because they are surpassing the traditional boundaries of human performance in every extreme sport that there is. The records just keep falling, and the limits just keep being pushed out and out and out. And that's because people have to take risk. They have to access these total involvement flow states. And it's a really exciting thing.
Yeah, I like you, I have experienced flow as well. I've never jumped off in a cliff in a wingsuit, but I don't think you necessarily have to do that to experience flow. But it is an incredible feeling, and for me, it's that loss of that the inner critic is silenced. You almost become, you go outside of yourself, don't you? And you feel things happen without conscious effort. You just enter this state where you can just perform without trying. You're just allowing your body to perform this rehearsed set of of movements, and it's just such a powerful state to be in. For those people out there that aren't into adventure extreme sports, how could they experience flow?
So, people who flow, Csikszentmihalyi Mihai talked about people experiencing flow in most creative pursuits. Artists who get totally involved in the artwork that they're doing and then create this masterpiece and think, oh, where did that time go? Who painted that? That's a classic expression of creative flow. People who get involved in anything that they really, really love and are really passionate about, and that involves risk. And let's face it, if you're in the artistic sector and you're creating something, some form of personal passion that you're putting on public display, that's a risk. That's one of our most innate, primitive fears, the fear of making fools of ourselves in public. So creative pursuits there's a lot of examples of flow in creativity. I think there's also a lot of examples in people who are passionate about anything, because anything that you really, really love to do, then that's usually about activating the flow state. I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs talk about how they took risks and how they did this and they did that. And when you listen to what they got out of it on an emotional level, then they're talking about flow. When you look at this distinction between explorers and extreme sports people, I don't go for that distinction, because if you read the works of the great explorers, like if you read what Shackleton's saying about what he got out of emotional, he was there because he was getting into the flow state. And most explorers are getting into the flow state. And yeah, they love to say we did it because we wanted to fill in the blanks on the map, or we wanted to, free the, whatever they wanted to do. There's always a kind of, in traditional exploring in the geographical societies around the world, there's this, well, why did you had some ulterior higher purpose to do what you did? And when you go base jumping, and it's a gesture like this to all of exploration, because there isn't any exploration of the physical environment. There is exploration of the mental environment, and it is like an explosion in terms of exploration of the inner sanctum, the innermost soul of who we are. Boom, straight in there. That's what base jumping, that's what extreme sport allows us to do. And that's why I get annoyed by the geographic societies poo-pooing extreme sports, because everybody wants this state. It is an expression of not just our creativity, but it's an expression of our fundamental self, who we are. And for some of it, it's through extreme sport, but for many others, it's through art, it's through music, it's through being an entrepreneur. The only thing that's a dud is the people who want to get that state through artificial chemicals, through drug taking. That is a dud, and that's a false example of flow. But pretty much everything else that we can get really involved and passionate about, I think that's tapping into that state of flow.
Yeah, incredible. And the basketball players talk about this a lot, don't they? They talk about going into this state of being unconscious when they're playing, and they're just performing at this peak level. They're just killing it on the court without even trying.
Every traditional sports team is now looking to extreme sport athletes to say, well, how do you get that peak human performance? And it's about, how do you get into that flow state?
Yeah. And so it's fascinating that you found flow through your extreme sports, through that risk taking. It's also been a gateway for a journey into yourself, discovering more about how you function. Have you been able to translate that into your medical practice? Have you been able to, say, find flow during a busy ED shift?
Yeah, well, I have to. I have to now because medicine has changed so much over the last 20 years in terms of its evolution of knowledge, and it's also its evolution of evidence-based principles. So we as medical practitioners all have to deliver. We have to be peak performers all day, every day. It's often really mentally taxing to do that unless you can ignite an internal passion for it and an internal involvement. And I mean, I've come to know and understand flow enough that I try to deliberately activate that even when I'm looking at, yet another stubbed toe. Oh, you stubbed your toe. Oh, how did you do that? Whatever. I mean, it's obvious it's there when you get that bat phone call and someone's coming in a car, bang, you're in the state, you're zoned in. But to kind of activate it with all of the trivial day-to-day stuff, that's a bit of a challenge. But it's something I'm getting better at because I've found that extreme sport made me, well, I believe it made me a better person. It made me a more resilient person. It made me a more appropriately confident person, not arrogant, but confident in terms of my emotional state. It made me more self-efficient, much more self-efficient. And it made me understand what courage is and what courage is not. And we all, when we're truly passionate about something, we all have to find courage and find commitment. And all of those things that I found in extreme sport, they've come back to, I believe, make me a better doctor. And so that, I think I've always said that every expedition I've been on, an external expedition, an adventure, is a metaphor for an internal journey. The true value of what is going on is the internal journey. It's about discovering parts of your own psyche that you didn't know existed. And that if you allow yourself to be excited and inflamed by that, that's a really enlightening experience.
I would like to talk for a moment just in a bit more depth about just a couple of the expeditions and adventures that you've had. There's so many that we could talk about, but let's have a look at the trip that you did with your wife a few years ago. You spent 3 months in the Indian Himalayas climbing Mount Meru. Tell us what happened.
So my wife heard me say many times that anybody who could control their fear and follow a sensible, rational, scientific process, anybody who could do that could base jump off the highest cliff in the world. And I used to say that, to audiences, and everyone would laugh. Yeah, right, Glenn, you're crazy, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. But my wife heard me say that many, many times. And finally, one day, somebody came to me and said, "Oh, look, Glenn, you think you jumped off the highest cliff in the world when you jumped off the Great Trango Tower. You didn't. There's a cliff that's higher. It's called Mount Meru in the Garhwal Himalaya in India." And I was telling my wife this story, and she said, "Here's your chance to prove your theory that anybody could do this stuff. Train me, and together we'll go and climb and base jump off Mount Meru." Now, you have to understand that at that time, my wife was not into extreme sport. And in terms of a set of physical skills, and she had to learn, it actually took 6 years for her to learn the physical skills. She had to learn to rock climb, to mountaineer, to skydive, to base jump, to wingsuit skydive, to wingsuit base jump, because wingsuits had just come out when we got this idea to do this. And so we just thought, well, wouldn't it be much better to fly off the highest cliff in the world rather than just jump off it? So we spent 6 years training together so that we could go and climb Mount Meru. It's about 21,000 feet, 6,000. It's over 6,000 meters, and then when we got to the top, we put on our wingsuits and flew off this ledge at the top of a 800 meter sheer vertical cliff, and it did set a world record. I mean, Heather broke my world record that I'd set on the Great Trango Tower. But more than that, it was an opportunity for us as a couple to explore dimensions in our relationship that most couples never ever get to go where we went.
Quite. I mean, there's many couples out there that are exploring shared interests like salsa dancing or yoga, and you and your wife are doing combining the disciplines of high altitude mountaineering and wingsuit jumping.
I mean, you get to see strengths and weaknesses, but you also get to see the other person going into those flow states. You get to share. I mean, they talk now. There's a lot of research going on about shared flow states in work environments, in team sport environments, where everybody performs beyond what they thought were their own personal limits, but the team becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And so Heather and I, when we finally, after 6 years of training, were able to climb and wingsuit base jump off Mount Meru, we entered the zone together, and it was a special part of not just a physical landscape, but an emotional landscape that only the two of us have ever been to. No one's ever repeated what we did, and we have this special memory. And the interesting part of that is that in Hindu mythology, Mount Meru is the center of the universe. So from a mythological point of view, we went to the center of the universe, but that was really a metaphor for we went to the center of ourselves. We together went to the center of our being, our souls, if you like. It was an incredibly special experience.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. So for many of our listeners may not be familiar with what a wingsuit is as an evolution out of skydiving and base jumping. It's the kind of next level on from that. Can you describe what a wingsuit is, and what does it feel like to fly through the air like a bird?
So wingsuit skydiving is an evolution of normal skydiving. It actually took about people tried to build wingsuits for about 70 years. And until a French guy called Patrick Degardillon built the first one, everybody who tried it died. Because when you're skydiving, you're traveling at about 200 k's an hour at terminal velocity. And if you have anything hanging off you, that it can send you into a spin. It can flip you over. Anything that changes your presentation to the air and the way that you flow through the air can affect your stability. And that's what everybody before Patrick Degardillon, that's what they all died from. Patrick had a profound insight that the way to build a suit that had wings under the arms and between the legs was to have openings into the suit so that the suit was like a ram air parachute. And when you fly one of these suits, they have openings on them that allows the airflow to enter the suit, and the suit is a closed container. And so when the air is rammed into the front of it, it assumes the shape that it's built in. And if you build it like a wing, you've got a wing under your arm and a wing between your legs, then it acts like a wing. And so instead of falling out of a plane and going straight down, these things are gliders, and they have a gliding, well, they used to have a gliding ratio of about 3-to-1, 3 meters forward for every 1 meter down, but that's improving all the time. So now they're up around the 4-to-1, the really high performance suits. So, but you're wearing these things and you have to fly your body. So
do you have to maintain a lot of tension in your body to, obviously your arms become the wings, your trunk is the fuselage. Does that require a lot of core strength and control to?
I mean, human shoulders are not nearly as strong as bird shoulders. So it does require a lot of strength. And the limit now, I mean, the suits are getting more and more powerful, and they're approaching the limits of what people can actually hold in the suit. So the latest versions of wingsuits are incredibly high performance pieces of technology. But the sensation of being in a wingsuit is just like you imagined when you were a kid. You imagined flying. It's just like that. You fly your body. You dip one shoulder and you turn in that direction. You lift up your legs or you change your leg. You can do everything that you imagined that you could do when you were a kid by altering the shape of your body. It is personal human flight. You are interacting with the environment. You're not in an aluminium, steel, or wooden wire constructed thing called an aeroplane. You are the aircraft, and you are flying. And it's
incredible purity to it.
There is, yeah, I mean, I have to say that every time I get into that suit and get out of the plane, I'm in the zone. I'm in that flow state, straight out the door. It's like bang, instant switch on.
Yeah. And what's going through your mind when you're stood at the top of the world's highest cliff on Mount Meru, and you're looking down into the abyss? You're there with your wife Heather, and you're thinking about jump. What's going through your mind? How do you prepare to do something like that in your head?
For me, the more important thing is what went through my mind before I got there. What sort of preparations did we have in place? What sort of technology have we got? What sort of judgment have we used? What are the weather conditions around us? You make all of those decisions before you usually when you're standing just back from the edge of the cliff. And though you make those in a rational, objective way, yes, this cliff is vertical. I mean, we stood there on the edge of Mount Meru and dropped off big rocks and hunks of ice, and we counted how long it took before they hit anything. And, it was about 14 seconds. So we knew just from, physics that we were looking at an absolutely sheer wall of, a couple of thousand feet, 800 meters. Then we knew that we had the technology because we had used that same technology countless times out of a plane, and we did lots and lots of training together in Arco in Italy, where there's Mount Monte Brento is a 4,500 foot cliff that you can drive to the top of it. And we went up there and jumped that cliff together time and time again, practicing every element of that particular launch that we were going to do off that particular cliff. So we knew we had the technology, we knew we had the training, we knew that we had the weather. I mean, we were kind of lucky with the weather because when we first got up there, the whole mountain was covered in cloud, and you can't jump in cloud in a wingsuit because clouds have got really big rocks in them in the Himalaya. But we waited After waiting we waited about 4 hours. We got a clearing in the cloud, and there was hardly any wind, and the cloud just lifted, and there was our landing site, a couple of kilometres down the valley in front of us. And then once we knew that everything was right in terms of environment, in terms of technology, and in terms of our personal training, we committed. And then when we committed, that's when we stepped up to the edge. And then it was about being involved with that commitment to actually do what we had intended and trained ourselves to do. And that, often that's the scary part, but we'd done those exits so many times that once we had used our judgment and said, yeah, we have the knowledge, skills, and equipment to do this, we just committed and did it. And the moment that we go through this countdown, ready, 3, 2, 1, go. And when we do that, it's like we enter into that zone of peak performance. And in that zone, there's just involvement. I remember you can see things clearer. Your thought processes are going much faster. Time slows down. You sort of lose this sense of self, because we were just part of this environment. And to be part of a spectacular environment like Mount Meru and the glaciers around there was, to be truly part of it was, it's a feeling that's very difficult to describe how profound that really is.
Yeah. For all of our listeners that have been up in the mountains, and we've all peeked over edges and thought, wow, look at that. Look at the air beneath our feet. Imagine jumping off that. And then we have the second thought is there's absolutely no way I would ever do that. But you've been doing that for a living for around 20 years or so, Glenn. And many people would argue that you're not quite normal, that you're somehow a different breed. Is there perhaps some kind of genetic basis for your risk taking and your ability to tolerate that kind of fear and that kind of danger?
Yeah, there's some really interesting research about that. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, Marvin Zuckerman from the University of Delaware described the D4DR gene on chromosome 11, which is linked to sensation-seeking behaviour, the so-called thrill-seeking gene. And Professor Zuckerman developed a questionnaire, a scale. And what he was able to do was to identify, this scale identifies high sensation seekers and low sensation seekers. And he found that this correlated very well with the number of copies of the D4DR gene that you have on chromosome 11. So you can have between 2 and 11. And people who have 2 copies are low sensation seekers and probably working in administration. And people who have 11 copies, they're the ones like me and my wife who jump off Himalayan mountains with wingsuits. And interestingly, I had the test done. My wife and I both were involved in some brain development research at the Westmead Brain Development Centre. And sure enough, we've got 11 copies of this particular gene. And the actual gene, it codes for the sensitivity of the dopamine receptor in the central nervous system. So our dopamine receptors, with 11 copies, our dopamine receptors are less sensitive to dopamine. So to actually get, and dopamine being the sort of the feel-good part of the brain, to get that to feel good, we have to release more dopamine. And so to release more dopamine, we have to get involved in more high sensation seeking activities. And the interesting thing that's coming out now is the connection between dopamine and norepinephrine or noradrenaline in our brain and the flow state. These seem to be the chemical mediators of the actual flow state. So people like Heather and I, who have got 11 copies of this D4DR gene, we have to really flood our brains with dopamine in order for our receptors to actually fire.
Wow. So by jumping off incredibly high places, you are fulfilling your genetic destiny.
Yeah, well, it's like we are compelled by our genes to behave in this way. And it's interesting. One of the interesting corollaries of Zuckerman's research is that this was one of the first genetic determinants of behavior and personality that was sort of elucidated. And as we understand more and more about genes and behavior, so we're coming to understand that much more of our behavior is, sure, it's influenced by the environment, but it's incredibly influenced by our genetic makeup. Things that we thought were, uniquely an expression of us are in fact just an expression of our genes speaking through our behavior. It's interesting, very interesting what that means.
Yes, and you've been to some very high places, but also some very deep places. I understand in the early 2000s you worked with James Cameron, both exploring the Marianas Trench and also the wreck of the Titanic. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so once you enter the world of extreme sport and metaphorical internal exploration, you start to find other kindred spirits. And it so happened that James Cameron, the director of Titanic and Avatar and whatnot, he is a kindred spirit in that he loves to explore the boundaries of his own possibilities. And he really does make films like Hollywood films. He makes that as a way to fund his real passion, which is exploration, both physical exploration of mostly the underwater environment, but also exploration of his own psyche. And so it was natural that Jim and I should get together, and he's invited me to go on a few expeditions with him now, ostensibly in my role as a doctor, as an expedition doctor. I mean, it's a very handy ticket to have to be an expedition doctor. You get to do some really cool things as a little plug for expedition medicine courses all over the world. And Jim invited me to go on an expedition, another expedition to the Titanic, because the Titanic is dissolving. It's being eaten by iron digesting bacteria, so that in about another 10 years, most of the decks and a lot of the superstructure of Titanic will be gone. And in about another 30 years, Titanic will probably be a fairly big mound of just rust or iron oxide on the bottom. So Jim wanted to make another documentary going deep inside the wreck, filming parts with ROVs, filming parts of the wreck that hadn't been seen since it sank in 1912. So that was an incredible project to be involved in, and I was lucky enough to actually go down to the wreck and help on some of the filming stuff. But one of the things that is mind-blowing, it's mind-blowing being 12,500 feet, more than 4,000 meters under the surface of the ocean. Just the pressure, even at the Titanic, is like having a car stacked onto your wrist. So the technology to withstand that, you've got to be inside a big steel sphere that's about 6 inches thick, and to withstand that kind of pressure, and the technology to do that was just incredible. But when you get down, the thing that you can't grasp when you go down to the Titanic is the size of the thing, because, we've all seen pictures of it and, you've seen it in the movies and whatnot, but until you go there, you don't understand that it is Titanic. It is like a 10-story high building, down there on the bottom of the ocean. And as you come along in this little sphere that you're in, looking out this little porthole, and you look out on the bottom of the ship, and then the submersible we were on started lifting up and 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 up, and you're just going past twisted, bent, decks that have been crushed and squashed, and weird shapes of metal that where the ship was torn in half, and you just keep going up and up and up and up and up and up, and it's 10 stories high, and you just you get to the top like, whoa, that is big. It's an incredible wreck, and that's one of the greatest things about actually going down there, was experiencing if I can say this, experiencing the Titanicness of the Titanic. That it's an incredible thing. And then, because we were successful with that, at the end of that, we were all shooting the breeze, and somebody said to Jim, what do you want to, where do you want to go with this underwater exploration stuff? And he, straight away said, I want to go to the Mariana Trench to repeat the dive that Don Wash and Jacques Picard did back in 1960. I want to do that because it is the holy grail of underwater exploration. So I was privileged to be involved in the team that developed the technology over 7 years in a little warehouse in inner city Sydney. That this technology took Jim all the way 12,000 metres down, 37,000 feet. The pressure there is like having a freight train, not just a car, but a freight train stacked onto your wrist. 16,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, wow. 1,600 atmospheres. So a small team of us, Jim hand selected about 50 people from all over the world to come together, and I was privileged to be involved in developing the life support, or helping develop the life support system, and then going on the expedition to help look after everybody out there. I didn't get to go in the submersible because it was basically only Jim went down for that one particular dive. But the technology, it was a great physical achievement, but it was an even bigger mental and psychological achievement, because that dive done back in 1960 by Don Walsh and Jacques Picard, it was like everybody thought that was the limit of human possibility in terms of deep ocean exploration. And it would never be repeated again, because all of the resources of the US Navy went into making that happen in 1960. And yet here was a guy with, sure, deep financial pockets, but he put it together with a small, dedicated, fearless team who showed that it was possible for a private individual to do this. And that was kind of that opened the floodgates, as often happens with, breakthroughs in extreme sport or any extreme undertaking. Once the mental barrier is shattered, then a whole lot of new things happen. And the interesting thing about we did the Mariana Trench thing with Jim in 2012. In 2019, just 7 years later, I again was the doctor on Victor Vescovo's expedition, the Five Deeps expedition, to take a larger submersible made out of titanium. Victor took that to the deepest point in the 5 oceans. And the Mariana Trench was just one of 5. And it was a vehicle so well constructed, so well designed, that it went 5 times to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 10 days. It has opened, and it's got commercial certification. So it's opened up the whole of the bottom of the ocean for exploration. This vehicle is commercially certified to go anywhere on the ocean floor, anywhere. And that has never been, like, that's a mind-blowing scientific exploration concept, that we now have a vehicle that can go anywhere. That's never been the case in all of human history. And 70% of the planet's covered in water, so the possibilities are just, we like to think we know a little bit about our world. We only know about 30% of our world, and the rest of it,
it's said that we know more about space than we do about the deep ocean.
Yes, that's what they say. We know a lot about the deep ocean, though. I mean, I was privileged to meet some incredible and work with incredible scientists on Victor's and Jim's expeditions. I mean, there are some really interesting things going on in deep ocean research. And this is, watch this space, because the possibilities are absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, we saw video of things that, that Victor saw down there, that, there aren't even names for the things that the species that we saw. Just incredible. Wow. The possibilities are incredible. Wow.
So those sound like a pretty good series of gigs for an expedition medic.
Yeah, that was a tough one. But someone had to do it.
And were you busy medically on board the ships supporting those trips?
With all of these trips, to me, it's about the preparation. The busy period is before the expedition. If you're busy on the expedition, then you haven't done enough preparation, I believe, unless something catastrophic happens, like you're at Everest Base Camp when the avalanche hits, which friends of mine were. That it's very difficult to do enough preparation for a natural catastrophe like that. But on a controlled environment expedition like a deep ocean research thing, it's very tempting to take a hospital, but you can't fit a hospital on the ship. So you have to have a good understanding of what you're likely to encounter. And, because common things happen commonly, so what are the common things that happen in marine medicine? So I've done a lot of work on different environmental, medical response to environmental situations. And that's, stood me in really good stead on pretty much every expedition I've been on. The more work I can do in preparation, the more I can understand the environment, the more I can understand the personalities and the psychology and the makeup of the people involved, and also their, physical limitations. We've all got, little things that are a problem, can be a little problem down here, but at high altitude or deep ocean, they can be a huge problem. So, and the more that I find that I research all of that stuff before I go, the smoother things run when we actually get out there into those extreme environments.
So that seems to be a thread that's run through all of your work, this concept of preparation. And one thing we teach in our courses is that piss poor performance is predicted by poor preparation. And it's great to see you embody that, Glenn.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So the big thing of the moment is this global pandemic, and it would be useful, I think, for our listeners to talk a little bit about that. And I hope we can do that without using the term unprecedented.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on in Australia at the moment. What's the vibe on the ground in your country and in your emergency department?
So we, comparatively speaking, we're geographically lucky in Australia because we're an island, we're isolated, and there's a big moat around us, and we're a small population with a large country. And we were also very proactive. I really have to give credit to the government for listening to evidence-based medicine and scientific advice and undertaking what were, when they first came out, unpopular measures. The measures of social isolation, the measures of closing down many of the businesses, the measures of and enforcing those difficult public health measures. They got that right, and they got in there early. So it looks like we're starting to flatten our curve out by some. A lot of people think that these are draconian measures and infringe on civil rights and all that sort of stuff, but they're just evidence-based, sensible, scientific, pandemic approaches. And because, everybody knows that there's as yet no vaccine, no cure, so the only prevention is the only tool that we've got in the toolbox at the moment. So what I'm impressed about with Australia's response, there were some hiccups at the beginning, but now that it's kicked into gear, and there will be economic consequences, but it seems to be paying off in terms of what's happening to the spread of the disease by adopting really rigorous and enforced by law social isolation. And, they shut down schools, they shut down businesses, they shut down travel. It's been really, really, some people say heavy-handed, but I think it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate and evidence-based and guided by people who know what they're talking about, yes. People who are experts in pandemics and public health. And so while, there is a lot of fear around, I'm kind of, this is one of the good things about having done all the extreme sports I've done. I've dealt with a lot of fear. So I am reasonably good at separating subjective and objective fear. And there are some things to be very afraid of with COVID. But there are some things that are part of the media hype and not necessarily appropriate to be afraid of. And learning to understand the difference between those two fears is something that, like my extreme sport experience has given me, and also my medical experience, because we are an evidence-based profession. So if we stick with the evidence and keep away from the hype, then we're all better equipped I believe we're all better equipped to manage this in the most appropriate way possible. And unfortunately, some countries in the world have not adopted evidence-based approaches, and we're watching them pay big prices for that. So what I'm pleased about in Australia is that we very early on adopted public health measures, and at the moment we've got a really good supply of PPE, and we've got a really good set of guidelines on how to use the PPE, how to use the test kits appropriately, how to manage the spread of the disease, and the sensible allocations of the resources that we have. And I'm a little, everybody's a little nervous, but we're a little bit, we're also encouraged by what's starting to happen to the curve of the spread of the infection here. And it's a shame that, the whole world wasn't able to kind of get in front of the spread of the epidemic with more public health, more dramatic public health measures earlier. But, that's kind of what it is. And I've got to say that I'm quietly pleased and quietly confident with what's going on over here.
Yeah, great. The measures in Australia sound very similar to what's happening in the UK at the moment. I mean, many of my colleagues have voiced concern about lack of PPE. We know that health workers are 3 times more likely to be infected by COVID than the general population. They're worried about infecting their families. They're worried about the pressure on the health system, the massive loss of life that faces us, and the economic fallout after this. Are those any of those fears or that sense of overwhelm that is being shared in medical circles? Is that something that you've personally experienced, or have you, given your background of extreme sports, do you feel been better placed to be able to rationalize that and compartmentalize and process all of that?
So one of the interesting things is to think about history. And I mean, there have been pandemics, but there were, some were well managed, some were not so well managed. But one of the interesting things that I look at a lot is if you look at the response to, or the industrialization response to a catastrophe like the Second World War, there was an incredible response in America in terms of an industrial output response and a retooling of society and a retooling of industry. And that will happen in America. I mean, the Americans are really good. I mean, they're a little slow starting, but they're really good at coming together to retool their industry and their society around providing what's needed in terms of resources. And that's, that I believe that will mean, I mean, everybody knows we have to have enough PPE. That's it. Everybody knows that. So everybody has got that as a priority. And I'm quietly confident that there is enough industrial capacity in the world to really make sure that all of us have all of the PPE that we need. And if that's not happening, then there needs to be political and sort of social pressure brought to bear on the industries that provide those resources that we all absolutely need. And all my friends, they've all kind of said, oh, typical, we thought you would be on the front line of this. And yes, I am, but once again, I'm going on that front line into the emergency department, into intensive care, using the evidence of having what good PPE is all about, how to apply good PPE, how to don, how to doff, how to be super paranoid and careful. And to me, that's about that, once again, that same thing I talked about before, the objective managing of risk, not just a blind taking of risk. Because, if you look at the Australian society, where we're getting problems is with people not taking on board the advice and just ignoring, the rules about social isolation and ignoring the risks that we all know, saying, oh, this is nothing to worry about. That kind of attitude gets lots of people killed. But I'm encouraged that there is this incredible degree of social responsibility that's kicking in, and people are listening to the advice. People are following these directives, understanding that this is, for the good of society. And I'm encouraged by that. And I'm encouraged by the evidence that basically, if we use as much technology as we can in terms of protecting ourselves, it is possible to do. And so I'm fanatically careful and fanatically paranoid, and I bug all of my colleagues all the time, about what they should be doing with their PPE, because complacency is our enemy in this situation. Be thinking that oh, it's I don't need to change it again. I'm sick of changing out of this stuff. No, we need to change it again and again and again and again. And it is my hope that, I mean, we are going to get a vaccine down the pipe, and when that vaccine comes, it'll hopefully that's what will make the difference. But until that actually happens, then social isolation and PPE is about all we've got. So
yeah.
But I think it's really interesting how, I suppose, analogous to the mountaineering and base jumping world, that you are very, you use the word paranoid, but very disciplined with checking and trusting your own equipment, your own expertise, the evidence base behind what you're doing, and that perhaps you feel that by doing that, just in the way you check your equipment when you're about to do a big jump, or apply PPE when you're about to see a patient in a COVID ward, do you feel that really gives you some courage to go into that situation, that trust that gives you, that you've done everything you can to manage those risks?
It gives me the experience, I guess. It gives me the confidence because, I have, it sounds melodramatic to say I've put my life in the hands of technology, so many times, blah, blah. I have, though. We, in the context of extreme sport, we've trusted our training, we've trusted our equipment, we've trusted our judgment with our lives time and time again. And so, maybe this is another one of those situations, but it does give me a certain level of confidence that I've done this kind of stuff before, and this management technique has kept me alive, and I think it will keep me, alive and healthy in this current crisis too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been great chatting to you, Glenn. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Will. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Is there any way that people can connect or reach out to you?
I mean, we've in this realm of social media, we've all got websites, we've all got films, we've all got books. I mean, our website is baseclimb.com. It's got lots of information about Heather and myself, and I mean, it's got Heather's story on there, and I find her story, I hesitate to use the word ordinary person who achieves the extraordinary, but her story of transformation is inspirational to me, and I think to many other people. And there's a lot of films that I've been involved with, and they're all kind of there on the website. So if you'd like to have a look or contact us, you can contact us through that baseclimb.com.
Great. And of course, Glenn will be joining us at the annual World Extreme Medicine Conference this autumn in Edinburgh. It's going to be great to see you in the flesh, and people will get a chance there to chat with you and hear a bit more about your story.
Yeah, really looking forward to coming to the conference. It's an incredibly exciting agenda, and really looking forward to, sharing some stories and inspiration and possibilities with a bunch of like-minded people. That's going to be really exciting.